Good morning, Donut Friendly Nation. Matthew Spear from the Donut Friendly Show. I hope everyone's doing well. How's your day going? It's Red Friday. Remember, everyone deployed. I won't give you a shameless plug to go over to the Donut Friendly Show at thedumbshow.com to pick up your Red Friday merchandise. That would be just tacky. What are we going to talk about this Friday? Well, I rewatched the debate, and I thought about going through the 70 some odd lies that Kamala Harris told and maybe make some excuses for why Donald Trump didn't perform the way you expected him to. And some of you may say he was fantastic, it was the best he's ever been, and we hear those things, and others are saying the sky is falling. And I'll tell you that this debate didn't move the needle. When we look at Kamala Harris doing her ABC interview, it didn't do a darn thing. When we looked at the DNC, she didn't get a bump from that. Whenever Donald Trump's cases go ahead and rear their ugly head yet again, they don't get a bump from those things. Really, the reason why Kamala Harris got a bump is because people who were no longer interested in participating in the election process from the Democrat side became interested again. Because, let's face it, a bag of pucks probably would have been more exciting than Joe Biden. And in Kamala Harris, the court is still out on the decision whether her value is equivalent to a bag of pucks, less or more. But I'm not going to do those things. I think what's important is there is a fantastic saying that I've really kind of always had in the back of my head when I'm looking at current events or predictive analysis in the future. And it's the saying, what is past is prologue. It's not quite as popular as people are saying history repeats itself, but that's essentially what it means. But by saying specifically that it's prologue, it's kind of, when you start to see the same remnants of the past through the annals of history start rearing its ugly head yet again in the present, it will give you a key indicator that history indeed is going to repeat itself. So when I think about that, I look at the two largest issues going on in the country, and these are the two biggest. People think it's abortion, or people think it's the war in Israel, or the price of oil. All of those things are important, and they certainly rank on the echelon of the 1 through 17 top things that constituents care about. But really, it always comes down to the economy. And a phrase coined, "It's the economy, stupid," is apropos in 2024 as much as it's been in past elections. And the second thing is illegal immigration and the border security of the United States. The interesting piece on these things is it happens to be two of Donald Trump's strengths. And although the debate did run amok from what we hoped would happen, and that's what happens when it's 3 against 1. And I want to thank the moderators, the one who introduced Kamala Harris to her husband and her sorority sister, for taking part in the overall browbeating of a former president. But what's new from the media? I think about that the first 20 minutes of the debate was actually quite strong for Donald Trump. And what we know is that 60% of viewers who tune into the debate usually are out in the first 15 to 20 minutes because they can't stand the regurgitated bile raising to the top of their neck. Unfortunately, we had to continue to watch it because we chose this profession. But what we found is that first 20 minutes was fairly strong for Donald Trump. He answered the questions on the economy. He got the jab in regards to Kamala's father and his ties to socialism and communism. And we all know she's the same. So the long way around the barn is, why am I talking about these two specific issues? Well, one is because everybody is talking about these two specific issues. But more importantly, what is past is prologue. I'm not going to focus on the border, how in the 1980s and 90s and 2000s, including Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, top-ranking Republicans like Newt Gingrich, all were divided. And the Democrats always talk about this great party switch that happened during the Civil Rights Movement, which is a complete crock. The South didn't even vote for a Republican for 20 more years, and that was Ronald Reagan. But I digress. It used to be the opposite. In fact, immigrants who came from south of the border predominantly voted for Ronald Reagan because this was a Republican issue, which is expanding the overall voter base and bringing in immigrants into our country for a new perspective. And what we found is that, unfortunately, a lot of the jobs in the country that were unappealing to U.S. citizens, immigrants would take. And this was a bold strategy by Reagan. And he was for legal immigration, and so was the Republican Party. And guess what? We still are. It's the word illegal that Ronald Reagan and Republicans have been, from the top of the Mount Sinai, decrying to anyone who would listen and saying that it's not something that's acceptable. So I don't need to get into immigration. We know the truth. We know what it was like under Donald Trump. He had the least border crossings of any president in U.S. history. He had the least amount of deports of any president in history. Biden hit it in the first 9 months and eclipsed Donald Trump's deports over 4 years. Obama was the deporter in chief. And people are like, well, that's good, right? You should be deporting people. Not really, because if you're deporting them, it's because they got over illegally. And those illegal border crossings are the problem. Because how many have you let get away or got away is the true indicator of how porous the border is, and how many people aren't showing up to their asylum hearings and overstaying and just simply saying, well, I'm not going to show up. I'll just stay in country. I have a life here. It's been 9 months. Who cares? They're not going to come and get me. So we don't need to go into immigration. We know the media tells us that Republicans are horrible and Border Patrol agents on horses whip immigrants. Those were Haitians, by the way, I believe. I didn't see any cats in the video. Those horses better be careful. But that was a lie. And we know that when they said that Donald Trump said that all illegal immigrants are criminals from the sense of rapists and drug dealers and murderers, well, they're all criminals because they're breaking the law. And then the other things are also true. Not all of them, of course not, because who plays in this pedantic game of breaking down every single word and trying to make some sort of practical nuance that works inside your liberal brain? I don't think anyone wants to play that game. We know what he was saying. This is just like Charlottesville. Good people on both sides. Liberals have been melting down over this for years, but we all know what was said. We all know they clipped it. But we're not going to talk about immigration, and I'm not going to go into all the lies of Kamala Harris, even though that's what I've done in the first few minutes. What I really want to focus on is the history of the middle class. Now, you'll hear Democrats tout this line more than any other, and it's a good one. The economy is always better under Democrats. Really? Yeah, really. It is. The numbers will tell you that it's better. But let me ask you a question. Are the numbers telling you it's better now? And of course they are. Stock market's doing well. They're saying inflation's going down. They're saying the American valuation of the dollar is going up. We're supposed to go ahead and get this Fed home interest rate and loan interest rate lowered. All these wonderful things. How do you feel? It's amazing that no candidate, even Donald Trump, doesn't ask this simple question. Not, were you better off 4 years ago? Or who do you think can lead us into the future? How about the question, how do you feel? How do you feel about the economy? How do you feel about your pay? How do you feel about your house payment? How do you feel about your grocery bill? How do you feel about putting new sneakers on your child's feet? How do you feel about all these things? And that's the question, right? How do we feel? Maya Angelou said it best. People will never remember what you say, but they always remember how they make you feel. And that's true. Think about it. So right now we're being told this is the greatest economy ever in U.S. history by the Biden administration, but you know different, because this is the number one issue in America. If it wasn't hurting, this wouldn't be the number one issue in America, would it? So now that we know that, let's look back on other times. Let's look back on Obama. Let's look back on Clinton. What happened? Did you pay more in taxes or did you pay less? Did we have some of these similar conflicts and wars and proxies going on that were draining our budget through clandestine operations? Were our veterans taken care of? How much was gas? What happened to your house? What were interest rates like? We can ask all these questions again, and somehow we can scratch the surface of our brain and say, well, it didn't feel too good. And here's a simple reason why. Bill Clinton was fantastic at this. Bill Clinton had a surplus, one of the last presidents to have a surplus and balance the budget, so to speak. But it really wasn't a balancing of the budget. It was a gutting of the military, reducing Kevlar, reducing armor plating on vehicles. Certain types of rounds of ammunition were no longer available. Training ceased. Ships were reduced in the military by 30%. Bases closed all over the country. Everyone remembers this. So when you cut the military budget by $300 billion, that is going to have an impact on a $900 billion budget. Bill Clinton reduced our military to a razor blade fleet. It was really sticks and stones, bubble gum and spray paint, very similar to what the Russians did down on the build down of the Cold War, and still facing that today as they can't even go ahead and take Ukraine. I'm sure that $150 billion from the United States doesn't help. We're not going to do that. We're going to move on. But what Democrats do is that they decide to go ahead and cut national security, national defense, border security, and they trim and they cut in order to put money in the programs that they believe in. Unfortunately, there's two things that happen. One is that this gives you an overall good feeling when it comes to the bottom line of the budget annually. But when it comes down to the preparedness of our country, it winds up and ends up costing us in the end. Versus investing in long-term contracts and getting bulk discounts on planes and tanks and guns. We have to do a rapid buy like George Bush did and put production ahead of our own interest. George Bush had to rebuild our military for Afghanistan and Iraq. And whether you agree with being in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's a whole other conversation and a good one to have. This is common. Donald Trump had to do this with Obama and restore our nuclear capabilities to a higher level, had to reinvest in the military, had to revamp the VA, had to get special interest groups and pork barrel politics spending bills in his first 5 days being sworn in to sign a bill that was $1.2 trillion, predominantly with pork barrel inside. And it had the defense spending bill in. This is what happened. So what you see is an influx of spending from the incoming Republican president to go ahead and rectify and fix some of the negligent things that took place under a Democrat president. If you don't believe me, just look at the spending bills. Look at the defense spending bills in particular. Is that an excuse? Does that mean that Republicans are just the end-all be-all at a good economy? No, that's not true at all. But I will tell you, I would rather have a representation that focuses on decreasing spending and overall government influence than one who wants to expand it. And we heard this in Kamala Harris' debate. Spending $55 trillion in the first 35 minutes of the debate is what I counted. She's a Green New Deal candidate. She wants to expend spending on all social programs. She wants to go ahead and have Medicare for all. She wants to decrease the military presence and defense spending. She wants to confiscate guns. She wants to give free $25,000 to new home buy owners. And when all they're going to do is just raise the price $25,000 to compensate for that discount. Because if people have $25,000 handed out from the government, well, then people are going to tack it on to the overall sale of the home because that's the way this works. We know what she's going to do. 14 minutes in, and we're going to get to the original point, which is a build-up to all of this, and I hope you're still with me. You can sit here and think and how you feel over the last 4 years, but it's not going to take you to do that. You don't have to just look at the last 4. I want you to look at the last 90. I want you to look at homelessness in the inner city. I want you to take a look at the 37 top cities for homicide and violence out of the top 50 that are democratically ran. I want you to look at food stamps and welfare and social programs, WIC, food stamps, these type of things that go into the inner city. The incentive for single mothers to go ahead and have more children in order to make more money. The disincentive for men to stay with their families and not abandon their children in the inner cities. Look at the epidemics of drug use. Look at the Democrats and their crime bills, whether it be from Bill Clinton all the way up to Kamala Harris, with the 3 strikes rule, with the disproportionate sentencing in the criminal justice system. You know, we always talk about these shootings that Democrats supposedly care so much about. And we look at these mass shootings, and they are horrific. And you hear every single year, oh, there's been 575 mass shootings this year. And immediately your brain goes to malls and concerts and high schools. But that's not where they take place. They take place in the inner city. Because if you shoot or harm 3 to 4 people, depending upon the city and the state and the crime statistic and what the FBI polls, but we'll just say 4, are harmed or killed, a casualty, in a drive-by shooting, gangland-style shooting, it's considered a mass shooting. And those make up 92% of the mass shootings that take place in the United States. Don't even get me started on people who rent a vehicle or somebody who goes ahead and decides to start shooting at vehicles on a freeway, which we saw last week. Or somebody takes a knife and decides to do copious amounts of damage. And these things aren't tabulated. But in the inner city, knife violence, hammers, baseball bats, and pistols are the number 1 killer, not an AR-15. Look at the last 90 years under Democrat control. Take Chicago, for example. Barack Obama said, this is my hometown, Chicago, Chi-Town. Go Bulls. Did he do anything? No. Did he bring in the National Guard? Did he hold the gubernatorial accountable, the mayor accountable? Did he hold the state legislature and the Senate accountable? Did he pass any meaningful legislation that reduced crime, that took the streets back, that gave it to the people? What about these opportunity zones in Chicago? What about Baltimore? What about Los Angeles? How about Detroit? Minneapolis? Baltimore? Did I say Baltimore? No, I didn't say Baltimore. This is the template for Democratic policy. So when they say they're going to take care of the middle class, I want you to think about that for just a second. And I want you to capitulate, disseminate, regulate the thought process of this. We know where the low-hanging fruit is in the lower class, they call them, the minority class. It's all the things I just said. Businesses, joblessness, homelessness, incentive programs to have business come in, tax breaks to help these businesses, to nurture them, to come into these areas, rehabilitate these neighborhoods, and give these people a chance at success. But when some kid looks at McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, or Del Taco as their employment opportunities because it's an off-ramp to a freeway in these neighborhoods, what's their incentive? How can they resist the pull of wearing gold chains and driving a BMW and listening to music while they deal crack or whatever drug it is today? The low-hanging fruit of the inner city and the lower class, the impoverished of this country, is relatively easy to fix. But that doesn't help the Democrats, does it? Because if you take the lower class or the impoverished and move them to the middle class, and you add a few years onto them, what you find is that it's the free market that makes them successful through capitalism and this country, the republic that we have, not an incentivized government program, not a handout, not an entitlement program, but them getting on their 2 feet and earning and going out and making a wage and bettering themselves through education and experiential learning. These are the things that make a successful person. I don't care if you're black, white, or indifferent. Everyone knows this. Willie Sutton says, when he was asked, why do you rob banks? And he says, well, because that's where the money is. People know that hard work creates success. People know that education creates success. And I'm not talking about a 4-year degree in some uppity elite college. I'm talking about getting your ass out there and failing and succeeding and learning at which one you're addicted to and replicating that result over and over with less fails and more success. If they can't even fix the lower class, the impoverished, how in the hell can they handle the middle class, which is the most complex economic group and demographic that our country faces? Once you have money, it's not that hard to keep it if you follow the rules of how you made it. But when you haven't had any money, and you won't have any money, it's awfully hard to figure out how to go ahead and lose what you don't have. But the middle class is on a teeter-totter ride. And one little nudge from either side, maybe too high of inflation, maybe rent goes up, maybe there's cancer in the family, maybe a car payment was missed, could literally change those people from going one way, which is down, into the lower class. It's much easier for a person to move from lower class to middle class than it is for a middle class to move to upper class. And the reason why is because it takes time. And there's more resistance from the middle class to go up because the middle class is the bread and butter. They pay the most in taxes. They own the most small businesses. They have the most invested in the stock market, in the economy, and they are at higher risk of losing it all than anyone. So when the Democrats sit here and tell you that they care about the middle class, how does that feel to you? What benefit do they have to change their party? They've had 90 years to help the inner city, to help the impoverished, to help the lower class, the peasants. But why would they? Would those are the people that vote for them with no reason for allegiance. The penitence that they display to the Democratic Party, the allegiance, the loyalty isn't earned. Democrats have done nothing for the inner city. Civil rights was a combined progression from conservatives and liberals. That's just the truth. It would never have been passed if it wasn't for conservatives. But nobody did it for the right of the people. LBJ and the Great Society did it in order to go ahead and hamstring and cripple African Americans and the minorities. He said it himself. I won't even repeat the words. But I'm going to give those N-words just a little taste of government. We're going to get them addicted to it. And then I'll have those N-words voting Democrat for the rest of their lives. This is the Democrat principles. And although it's certainly not said in the party platform, we all know the result. We all know where they stem from the Ku Klux Klan. That Jim Crow was not a conservative ideal, that it was a liberal coming out of the Klan. The Daughters of the Confederacy, who put these statues up that they now want to tear down, were ex-Klan members with re-envisionment history, trying to change the way that they talked about the Civil War, that it was a battle of paid labor and free labor versus slavery, and taking an entire group of people into indentured servitude and treating them horribly at the worst and treating them like pets at the best. You want to talk about the Tuskegee experiments, Japanese internment camps? You want to talk about redlining, where that originally came from? You want to talk about district rezoning, gerrymandering, and where that came from. Gerrymandering wasn't a conservative concept. It was removing the black vote from the white vote in the prestigious counties, specifically on the East Coast and in the South. And talk about eugenics and the process of aborting unwanted African-American children. This is still something that's embraced in the inner city versus education and contraception or finding faith or simply closing your legs No, the focus of just abort it. And if not, don't worry, the government will pay you more money for having more kids. The modern-day slave plantations are alive and well here in the United States, and they are the inner cities. They are the impoverished, the lower class. And for any middle-class person to think that Democrats want you to move to the upper class, remember what they say about the upper class, that we need to pay our fair share, and we're a bunch of thieves, and we're greedy and manipulative. But that's not the truth. These people are trying to make a living, and they found how to burst the bubble. They found how to move from the middle class to the upper class, a very difficult venture for most people, because they have to risk it all, usually, to get to that level. The Democrat Party has never done anything for their constituents. They spend money wantingly. There's never any accountability. And every 4 years they come to your neighborhood, if at all. It depends if your vote means something. It depends if you live in a state that truly is on the precipice of being purple. That could be a swing state. How about all those Chicago votes? Oh, well, that's not important. What about New York? You'll see them in Michigan. You'll see them in Minnesota. You'll see them in Pennsylvania, because that's where they want to spend their time. Hell, they might even get down to Georgia a little bit and Arizona this year. But they won't hit the places that they know are Democratic strongholds. They won't visit you. They won't talk to you. Look at Donald Trump. At least he went to Brooklyn. At least he went to Queens. At least he's going to places like Tucson where he's not popular. Kamala Harris is going in the middle of Democratic strongholds that voted 70, 80, 90% for Joe Biden. It's not much of a risk. But what is a risk is for that class of people. The people who I'm specifically talking about in the middle class and the lower class. The peasants and the peons. For you to ask yourself the question, how do you feel? And if you don't feel better than you did 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, how your mother and father did 25 years ago, your grandparents 40 years ago, your great-grandparents 90 years ago. If you don't feel better than them, ask yourself the question why, and is it time to do something new? Because the Democrats are absolutely counting on that you don't. Thanks for watching the Don't Unfriend Me Show. We'll see you next time. I will be on tonight at 7 o'clock with Olivia, myself, Leroy, and I think that's it. God bless. Take care of each other. Oh, and don't go to The Dumb Show and buy a new t-shirt or something like that. We don't want you to do that. TheDumbShow.com. DUM, the show. See ya.
Adjusting transmitter output.
This is the Don't Unfriend Me Show with your hosts, Matt, Leroy, Amy, and Olivia. Geopolitics, military analysis, and election coverage. Coming to you live on all major social media channels at The Dumb Show. Honest, direct, unfiltered. We can agree, we can disagree. Just don't unfriend me.